Καλημέρα σε όλους, καλημέρα και από εμάς. Ξεκινώντας στο κοινό τραπέζι του φετινού Health World, με θερμές βεβαίως ευχαριστίες σε όλη την ομάδα του AmCham για αυτή την διοργάνωση, εξαιρετική όπως πάντα. Now, with your permission, I'll continue this discussion in English. This discussion will center around, of course, the changes in the European legislation on pharmaceuticals and medical technologies in general that are currently taking place. As you all know, and as the Minister previously reported, these are parts of the attempts to motivate innovation and access throughout Europe. This legislation has had a series of voices for and against it, and although it has reached some maturity, international evolutions seem to be sort of resetting the clock, actually, at least in some aspects of the proposed changes. Now, will this change the discussion around medicines and innovations in general in Europe? That's what we'll try to discover with an excellent panel of speakers. Among them, Aris Angelis, our Secretary General for Strategic Planning in the Ministry of Health, Oliver Bisazza, the Chief Executive Officer of MedTech Europe, Nathalie Moll, the Director General of EFPIA, Phil Schwab, the Senior Director of Governmental Affairs in Europe for AbbVie Pharmaceuticals, Felix Uedelhoven, the Chair of the Healthcare Committee of AmCham in EU, and Vassiliki-Rafaela Vakouftsi, who is, of course, the President of the Greek Patients Association. Now, I would like to start the discussion with those online to facilitate some easier communication. I don't know if Oliver is with us, is connected, is online. Is Oliver online? All right. So we'll go on with the discussion, and as soon as Oliver is...
He's there.
Oh, hello. Hi, Oliver. Can you hear us?
We can't hear him, though.
Great. Good to see you. I hope you caught the introduction of this discussion. I just wanted to quickly ask, from your perspective, how's the evolving European regulatory framework influencing innovation and patient access? And I would like to discuss a bit more about medical technologies. And apart from that, could you share some thoughts on what the key actions should be in order to ensure that both continue to advance?
We can't hear him.
Oliver, you're probably muted, or perhaps it's our thing here, no? Let's try again. Can we hear Oliver, please? All right. So as soon as we resolve this, we'll come back to Oliver, and I'll start the discussion with you, Ari. Across Europe, there is, of course, a major discussion for a framework to improve access to innovative health technologies, with regulations and initiatives that shape how member states handle evaluation and reimbursement. I know that we contribute to this discussion, and I would like you to enlighten us on how Greece actually contributes in co-designing those policies, and how we actually plan to align with these changes to ensure that innovation reaches those in need.
Okay. Good morning to everyone. Hello. And I think this is a very interesting topic, given the very timely discussions that we're now witnessing at the EU level. So there is a cluster of different regulations, of different acts, of different legal frameworks that will start becoming implemented as we move forward from now on. Possibly the most important new legislation act is the pharma package, the pharma legislation package, right? Which is now in trialogue phase. A number of different clusters of articles, in essence, are trying to holistically manage to balance aspects in relation to innovation versus access. We know that currently one of the most challenging topics for healthcare systems is to somehow balance this balancing act between health policy objectives in terms of providing access, but in a sustainable way, while at the same time giving the adequate industrial incentives in order to promote innovation, and promote competitiveness, have economic growth, and so on and so forth. And in essence, this pharma legislation reform has a number of different objectives, spanning both purely market access, health policy objectives, but at the same time in a sustainable way and while providing the right incentives. So I'll just focus on the fact that the Minister just mentioned in his session that Greece is actually a pro-innovative country. Our position was to protect the current framework in terms of the regulatory data protection and market protection, while at the same time, though, and this is important to highlight, advocating in favor of additional articles in relation to ensuring the resilience of the supply chain, ensuring that we have tools that can mitigate shortages. And one of these tools in relation to access to innovative treatments is the so-called Article 56A. So Article 56A, for those of you that don't know what it means, in essence is a tool that is being provided to the member states to actually allow the member state to oblige the market authorization holder to launch a product in a specific country. So countries such as Greece, countries such as Cyprus, even more, small member states with small markets where it might not represent a very profitable market, now will have an additional tool which in essence will allow them to ask from market authorization holders to come in the market and start the discussions. And this is important to highlight. That means that member states, ministries can now ask from market authorization holders, from companies, launching new treatments, innovative treatments potentially, to actually come to their markets, come to their countries, and start the process. This is just the beginning of the process, right? So ministries will be able to actually say, okay, come in our country and submit a file. Obviously, what will happen afterwards, given that there might be also a negotiation process, remains to be determined. But in essence, still, we have an important tool that is on the side of the member states to actually ask for the launch of specific treatments with innovation potential. And this is the pharma package now we're talking about. At the same time, it's very important to highlight what's been going on in terms of another more industrial objective position legislation package, which is the so-called Critical Medicines Act. And so what the Critical Medicines Act aims to achieve is to, in essence, bring the manufacturing base back to Europe. Because in essence, we've witnessed that due to the disappearing economic incentives for a number of different commercial entities and products, most of manufacturing of critical products, critical medicines, is happening in Asia. In China, as Professor Moll mentioned, and in India. So it's very important at this point in time to also amend the legislation framework in a way that provides enough incentives for market authorization holders, for regional manufacturers, but also for multinational companies to actually come back to Europe, invest in Europe, not just for innovation potential, but also in terms of providing basic old chemical entities, old molecules that are also very critical for a number of different therapeutic areas. And so these are two, I would say, of the most important legislation packages right now. The first, again, it's in trialogue. The second one, Cyprus will hopefully manage to close it and have an agreement in terms of the council level. But in essence, Greece is very actively participating in all these discussions at European level, at council level. We have a minister which is very advocate to actually raise his hand and express his views, always be able to intervene in case this is needed. And so we are, at this point in time, in a very good situation in terms of continuously communicating with all the major stakeholders, other ministries, other member states, in terms of coming up with an aligned position about what we think is the best for all societies and for all member states.
That's fantastic. That's great. I'll come back shortly to discuss a bit more on the local setting and how these apply and what the next steps should be. But allow me to roll this back to Oliver a bit, if he's currently online and connected. Probably if we can have Oliver online. No? All right, I was told that this was resolved, but no worries at all. We'll just continue the discussion, and hopefully we'll get to discuss on this with Oliver a bit shortly afterwards. Let me get to you, Phil, for a second, and discuss on how do you see the main global as well as political and regulatory trends in the pharma context, and how could this impact pharmaceutical innovation from your end? Yeah.
From the global perspective, well, first let me say, from the European perspective, I mean, it's incredible the amount of health policy that is now coming from Brussels. We've heard about it, the pharmaceutical package, the Critical Medicines Act, the European Health Data Space was referenced, the EU for Health program. There is a multitude of legislation, of regulation that is coming from Brussels and the European level at this time. What I'll say about that is that sometimes it's a bit incoherent. We have policies that want to enhance access, but at the same time want to shorten the life cycles of our innovative medicines. We talk about wanting to improve the regulatory environment, but in fact, we squeeze the intellectual property environment. So this becomes a bit incoherent. We also have a number of member states that are also taking action in their own countries to try to stimulate clinical trials, to try to stimulate investment in manufacturing. And sometimes these incentives or encouragements, if you want to call them, are also not necessarily in line with what we see at the European level, or the incentives or the definitions are different. So it increasingly becomes a bit of a challenge to dance between these different European level regulations and the local desires as well. I mean, we see that. I mean, one example is even still in the implementation of the joint HTA system. We still have very cumbersome, difficult, and long processes in the member states that, you know, if it takes 2 or 3 years to approve the reimbursement for a new medicine, that's time lost on your market exclusivity. And we now have the JCA coming. That is another step. But we don't really know how that's going to interact with these already complicated processes. We talked about it even here in Greece, how the Greek system will adapt to these changes. So that's at the European level. I think when we look at the global level, I think we all know the mood has changed. We only need to look at the events in the UK over the past couple of weeks, where the pharmaceutical industry is locked in a very difficult discussion with the government about the budget for innovative pharmaceuticals, the levels of clawback, and the decision by some major companies to either cancel or pause significant investments. I think this shows the seriousness of this need to rebalance the contribution to innovative pharmaceuticals between the United States and the rest of the world. It shows the seriousness that major companies are taking on this issue, and I think it shows that business will not continue as it has in the past.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Felix, I would like to bring the discussion a bit more on the dimension of competitiveness, a highly debated field during the last years in Europe. We have a series of geopolitical uncertainties. We have a series of changes in the regulatory environment. How do you see these influencing innovation as well as patient access, and what specific policy measures would you think would be most effective in strengthening the region's competitiveness?
Thank you so much for the question, and thank you very much for having AmCham EU at this discussion. I think it's important that we have these discussions with Greek stakeholders, with the Greek health system, but also bring in the European aspects, because many things are that we have to adopt here are coming out of Europe. So let me just mention a couple of things. From an AmCham EU perspective, we were of course very positive about the competitiveness and attractiveness agenda for Europe that was launched with Draghi. We saw the last 6-7 years, we had the Green Deal legislation, we had the digital legislation, and companies, all sectors across the board are struggling with the implementation, and so are public authorities. They're also struggling with the implementation of all these new laws. So the refocus on competitiveness is very welcome, but now, so what? Right? We need to find ways now to actually make those political commitments that were demanded by Draghi and Letta and the Antwerp Declaration from you name it. We need to find ways to actually implement that in concrete measures that relieve the regulatory burden for industry. And you gave a great example on the CMA, right? The Critical Medicines Act. I understand why the European Commission and the European member states want to bring manufacturing back to Europe for pharmaceuticals. We need to be very careful, though, that this trend doesn't exclude the innovation power that American businesses bring to the European market. And also, these type of decisions cannot be taken in isolation. You mentioned incoherent policymaking. And it is so true, because you can strive for the Critical Medicines Act, but if at the same time Europe continues to legislate certain sectors that are necessary requirements for successful life sciences, if Europe continues to legislate those sectors out of the market, then you cannot manufacture here. So I'm talking about chemicals, I'm talking about other legislation that impacts the medical device sector, such as ROS, for example, which limits the opportunities for us to use certain materials. So we'd love to manufacture here, we'd love to manufacture more here, but if the overall environment is not given in terms of, for example, inputs, that creates a significant challenge. So when Brussels is thinking, and when the member states are thinking about making Europe more competitive, don't just think about throwing subsidies and localization incentives at companies. We don't need that. What we need is an overall regulatory framework that allows for sustainable manufacturing in Europe.
I'll come back asking for some practical advice on this in our second round. And if I had to guess, through reading the 10 pages of Draghi's speech last week on the 1-year anniversary of the Draghi report, I think he wasn't that happy with the progress made. But it's good that at least we do some discussion on this, and there are certain, let's say, initiatives towards changing the landscape.
Draghi and I are aligned.
Yes. I think many of us are at this page, actually. Coming to Vaso, coming to patients, to an important part of the stakeholders, and actually an important part of, or at least should be, the decision-making process in Europe. Vaso, how do patient associations view the changes in the regulatory setting for technologies in Europe? Is it moving towards the right direction in terms of securing access? And what would you, as patients, need in achieving a fair representation in decision-making in this context?
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to be here. Before starting speaking, I want to think that innovation has no value unless it reaches the patient in time. So keep in mind when we speak about patient access and innovation. There is a strong ambition of Europe to lead in medical innovation, but this must be matched by equitable access across all member states, because nowadays there are some differences in availability of new medicines or diagnostics or devices between Western, Northern and Southern Eastern Europe. So this is a really big problem. And there are often several years passes between the EMA approval and the local availability before the patient have real access to the innovation. And sometimes patients are caught between innovation and cost containment policies, so this is not fair enough. And let's think that also access to innovation is a right, not a privilege, to be honest. So it supports a lot of the social cohesion and public trust in health systems. So timely access also saves some lives and reducing long-term costs of delayed treatment or delayed access to healthcare. And that is something that policymakers must recognize. They must recognize that innovation is an investment in a healthier, more resilient societies and economies, and it's not a cost, it's not merely a budget line item. In terms of participation of patients, there is a lot of discussion on this topic, but in my opinion, nothing about patients without patients. That's my motto, and that's the motto of patient associations and patient organizations at the European level. So we have to establish multi-stakeholder partnership, including patients, policymakers, industry, regulators, and payers, of course, to co-design the best possible solution for patients to have timely access and really access to innovation so they can get something of it. And I'm closing saying that, of course, timely and equitable access to innovation, it is possible in Europe. It is possible, but only if we act collectively and if we keep patients at the center of decision-making, at the center of policy-making in healthcare. So that's something that we have keep in mind at the European level, not only at the Greek level, but I want to mention that in Greece we have made some steps in patient participation in health policy, so maybe that's a good, let's say, practice for all the European Union to follow some same steps.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I know Felix had a thought on this.
Yeah, I love that we have the patient voice here in the room because we are all patients. And at some point in our lives, and let me just give you two examples that I think are close to everybody. So my mother received a breast cancer diagnosis 10 years ago, is considered healed, so we got very lucky. She got that breast cancer diagnosis in Germany from a Greek doctor on with a scan from a mammography machine that was built in France, with inputs from China, India, and the United States, and several other countries, all brought into France to complete that piece of medical equipment, then shipped to Germany, Cologne, Germany. So without that international, without a free-flowing international system where supply chains are uninterrupted and where the production of medical equipment is not made more expensive through tariffs and other measures, then the patient access piece and also the health system cost piece is really in danger. So I think we are all patients here in the room at some point in our lives, and the decisions that Europe is taking and the decisions we are taking at transatlantic level, putting tariffs on medical devices or pharmaceuticals is, at the end of the day, very detrimental to our national health systems and to patients getting access.
What do you think you should prioritize in order to achieve a sustainable environment for innovation in Europe?
So just staying in the theme of tariffs, since it's so present on the agenda, there was a lot of work done to include medical devices and pharmaceuticals under the a 0-for-0 agreement. And that didn't work out, aside from the generics. But now we've seen last week new initiatives by the Trump administration to create new tariffs for medical devices and also for innovative pharmaceuticals. And it's unclear whether these also apply to Europe or not, whether the 15% agreement trumps these new initiatives or not. It is unclear. So I think it is important now that as the European Union is trying to find a way forward, that we keep in mind that any additional costs that are introduced into the system for both pharmaceuticals and medical devices are, at the end of the day, limiting the capability of the European Union to innovate, for companies to innovate here, and to bring medications and medical devices to patients here in Europe as well.
Thank you. I know Phil wanted to add something on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are at least three main points to accelerate access to patients. Number one, and they're all under discussion right now at the European level. Number one, we need to simplify and speed up our clinical trial process. That's on the table for the Biotech Act. We hear that from company after company. We need a smoother pathway to clinical trials. Number two, we need to adopt the regulatory simplifications that are part of the GPL. This is a real advance, simplifying some of the mechanisms at the EMA, reducing the time frame between the CHMP and the Commission decision. Those approvals will speed access. But really, where it hits the rubber hits the road, so to speak, is at the member states. When Irish patients can wait 2 to 3 years to have access to a new cancer treatment that is made in Ireland, that's a problem. And we see examples of that across the EU, especially in the eastern and southern member states. But even France and Italy have very, very long delays for approval for patients. I mean, the innovation doesn't do any good unless it reaches the patient in a timely basis. So all of the efforts to try to deal with that in the GPL, the Article 56A, that's all fine. But at the end of the day, it's up to the member states to actually move these processes along. And the final thing, and Felix hinted at it, there's an urge right now. You can feel this urge right now for European protectionism, for supply chains, clinical trials. We need to resist that because, as Felix said, these supply chains are global. If we start to create little boxes where this must be done in Europe and that must be done in Europe, we're going to break those supply chains, and it's going to lead to less efficiency in terms of access.
That's really important. And you all referred to the changes and the initiatives from the US. And given that we had, let's say, new sort of plans or statements from the US administration a few days ago, do you see those statements for like 100% tariffs and so on reverting the discussion back to Europe and resetting the regulatory, let's say, efforts? Feel free to answer. Anyone? Ari, Felix, Phil, also.
Those were all surprises to us too.
I know.
But I mean, I think it shows the seriousness. It shows the seriousness of the U.S. administration to correct this imbalance. To correct this imbalance where the United States is carrying the heavy load of investment in innovative medicines, and Europe has been kind of gliding along with that. And what the U.S. administration is saying is that needs to end. And now we're all scrambling and figuring out how that's going to work itself out.
Is this a fair point, Ari?
So, I mean, these international discussions haven't really reached us at institutional level yet in a formal way. So we're in a watchful waiting situation, more or less, monitoring the situation. But in essence, and that would be a personal view, a personal position or interpretation of the existing picture would be that, US is a completely different healthcare system to begin with. Different dynamics, different institutions, organizations, and it's very hard to just, in such an aggressive way, go and borrow and implement what Europe has been doing for the last 20 or 30 years so far. because truth is that Europe, as a region, has been adopting the so-called value-based healthcare approaches for a number of years now. And although people might think that, okay, but the US is at the edge of innovation, right? Well, from an institutional point of view and a healthcare system point of view, Europe has been actually applying methodologies that can serve the decision-making way in a more value-based approach for a number of years. And a primary example of this type of a tool and the difference and contrast between the US and Europe would be the tool that has been used for a number of years by most member states at this point in time in relation to providing access to new treatments and new therapies. So health technology assessment as a term, right? It has been grown since the 90s in Europe, and now we see President Trump trying to somehow aggressively implement external reference pricing in a way that's not really feasible, at least from a first point of view, right? And so I think, even for the US, they could start learning the lessons from Europe, go towards a more value-based approach system that actually evaluates new treatments based on their added value, added clinical value, added economic value. This is what we have been trying to do over the last year here in Greece. Many people from the audience know that we are in the process of delivering a new project being funded by the European Commission, a technical support instrument in relation to strengthening our national framework for the evaluation of new technologies. The primary objective there is to actually become aligned with a new HTA regulation that involves the so-called joint clinical assessment. So as a country, as a member state, we need to be prepared, and we need to actually be actively participating in these JCAs. But at the same time, we're leveraging this new regulation and this project in order to enhance and strengthen wider aspects of our national healthcare system and HTA system. And so we have been doing a number of site visits with different HTA agencies in Europe, including France and Portugal and Italy. And again, I think it was mentioned before, we are also setting up a separate route for access to new potentially innovative treatments. And the minister also mentioned that, the so-called innovation fund or transitional reimbursement scheme. Again, the whole conversation here is around managing to ensure timely and equitably access to new innovative treatments, while at the same time trying to safeguard the sustainability of their healthcare systems. Again, the challenge behind all countries is the fact that the market and demand for these new technologies are growing with an unsustainable way, given the fiscal allowances of the different systems, right? So the growth, GDP growth of most member states is growing at a much lower state compared to the market, in simple words. And so that's why tools such as health technology assessment and all aspects of evaluating the added value of new treatments becomes exponentially more important, because we need to save resources. We need to come up with the best way of allocating our resources in the most efficient way that can actually provide the best benefit to patients and healthcare systems and societies in general. And so this is what we're trying to do. And an example would be HTA, but another example would be the transitional reimbursement scheme. You know about it, Professor Sliotis knows about it, which in essence provides an early access with conditions to treatments that have the prospect to actually come up with a meaningful added value for therapeutic areas with serious unmet needs.
Now, since those are really important steps forward, but since we're in a room full of people that love to plan and have to do some planning for the year ahead, I cannot not ask a few, let's say, timelines or milestones on these announcements and regarding the implementation.
Okay, so actually we have shared the current draft plan for the transitional reimbursement scheme with industry associations. We have an open consultation, so we have the first meeting taking place on Wednesday in terms of moving on with the legal amendments that we need to push forward for the implementation. We have been given the added budget from 2026. That means that we will be ready, up and running to implement things in practice from next year onwards. Minister mentioned that this is potentially just the starting point, hopefully. But because this was mentioned in the previous discussion, I should say that the 50 million euros is in essence close to half the amount that we would need in order to protect all therapies that go through this channel 100%. And so this is a very substantial starting point, let's put it that way, and we'll start implementing things in practice, we see how it goes, and then hopefully, if needed, we can ask for additional resources.
Thank you. Vaso, how do you as patients see the latest developments in pharma policy that Aris presented for the Greek setting?
Okay. Of course, we all know that the major barrier in Greece is the long reimbursement timeline after EMA approval. So everything that will help to mitigate this and to improve the time to access new therapies, it's the right direction, and hopefully all of these reforms that Dr. Aris Angelis said, maybe the good for the patient, it will be to work, so patients will have timely and effective access to medicines and not having to wait for a long time after EMA approval, because the patient is the same patient even if he lives in Greece, even if he lives in Germany or in other country. And thus, I also have an international role at International Federation of Crohn's and Ulcerative Colitis Association. So I see that there are so many differences between countries, and sometimes I feel a little bit strange when it comes the discussion comes to Greece, because sometimes patients have to wait even for 2 or 3 years or even longer to take the medicine, or they take it for a year with a named patient basis access, which is also a road for access medication, but it's not the normal reimbursement road. So I think that if we face this in time, and if we find a solution to this, I think the future will be brighter and patients will have better access. But we have to also face that there are some budget constraints and the clawback mechanisms in Greece that create some disincentives about early product launch in Greece, and maybe this is also a problem for Greek patients. So we have to see all these problems, and I think that working together, all the stakeholders, we can make the difference to timely access for Greek patients.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, in an environment that changes in terms of the regulations for health technology assessment is, of course, the answer of European health systems towards valuing innovation in a, let's say, fair manner, and actually a way you can negotiate in a monopoly situation. How do you see the evolutions, mainly regarding to the new regulation taking place in Europe? How do you see the timelines? How do you see the regulatory provisions standing after the change in policy in the US for the years to come? The question is open for anyone that wants to have a take on this.
You're working on the implementation, so...
Right. So, I mean, it's not easy to answer the question simply because we haven't seen ourselves the first JCA. So we are still expecting to receive the first JCA. We still want to take a look, a deep dive on what the JCA will include. But in essence, as a member state, or as a payer, or as a Ministry of Health, what we want is a tool that the national process can use in a timely manner. And so this tool, in the form of the JCA, could mean that there are some specific aspects of information, of assessment, and hopefully appraisal aspects that can be used directly in a timely way from a national process, the national system, so that we can push forward with more timely procedures, right? So we know about the delays. The JCA, one of the aspects and the scope behind the objectives was to come up with faster processes by having a central assessment procedure for the clinical benefit, and then obviously the different member states could use it in their own way. But it's really important to first see what this assessment really looks like in terms of outcomes, and how readily applicable or useful could be from the different member states, given the different requirements and different evidence procedures, and based on that, move on. So we're still in a situation where we also want to see how things will roll out in practice, given that there is almost a dozen JCAs right now in preparation, in progress, but none has been completed. So we're still in the process to actually waiting to see how they will look like.
Mm-hmm. Felix, yeah.
I'll just say that's exactly right. We're still waiting to see how this is going to turn out. Many member states use HTA to evaluate the value of new medicines and other technologies, but they all do it in a little bit different way.
Yeah.
And so this is going to be a test to see if the countries can sort of come together and agree on a process that simplifies that rather than makes it more complex. Mm-hmm. That's really going to be the test of the situation, because if every country says, well, I want to see this thing that I do in this thing, or I want to see this thing that I do, it's going to be almost impossible for us to assemble the proper dossier. I know several companies are already doing it. We have a year or two to wait before we have our first chance. But to me, that's going to be the test, whether this becomes a simplification procedure or becomes a complexification procedure.
The idea is, of course, to simplify and homogenize the approaches, but it's something to be seen, right?
But we know, and oftentimes, well, I'm not going to use this if I don't have my thing in there. Yeah. That's kind of how it works sometimes. So we need to get past that.
And just to add to that, from a medical device perspective, Europe used to be the market where the majority of medical devices were launched 10, 20 years ago. Today, that is different, because the regulatory environment has become too complex that companies prefer to launch it in the US or China. And Europe had a revision of the medical device regulation back in 2016, 2017, and it has shown in practice that the new rules that were established don't work. So we had several extensions of transition periods for the medical device regulation. The sector had asked to the European Commission to create some short-term measures that would, for example, create an accelerated pathway to the market for innovative equipment. But now the Commission said, all right, we can't doctor around with short-term measures. We're going to do a full revision of the medical device regulation. So that's coming, talking about deadlines, that's coming in December, January next year. So December this year or January next year. Great. But until those new rules are then agreed between member states, parliament, it's going to be another year or 2 or 3. And until that is then implemented. So we continue to need, as a sector, short-term measures that, for example, create regulatory reliance on market approvals, not only between the EU and other continents, but also, for example, that create a faster access to market for innovative medical equipment.
Do you see enough progress in the HCAR regulation for devices and joint clinical assessments
in the
new HCA regulation and the joint clinical assessments for the part of devices specifically? Do you see enough progress in this, or?
Not sure, to be honest. I think there needs to be a focus on getting the MDR regulation right this time, to just enable that more innovation-friendly environment in Europe that brings the innovative products back to Europe and not have them launch elsewhere.
I think the regulatory field is going to be severely tested in the field of medical devices alongside digital applications, I think, as those start to evolve and the regulatory framework is probably left behind a bit. There is a lot of, for example, there's a lot of discussion around when the new AI Act that will cover many of these arrangements, I think, are going to be put to place, probably around 2027, which is far too late, probably. But until then, I think that the regulatory framework for such technologies might be a little weak. I don't know if...
The overlap between the AI Act and lots of sectoral legislations, that's an entire other Congress to be discussed. I mean, this is a significant concern for the medical device industry, for sure. I'm sure for pharma as well, that the AI Act establishes AI rules that are implicating medical devices, for example, and
clinical trials.
And clinical trials, and there is significant concerns that this will, again, lead to a situation, higher costs for getting the product into market, slower procedures, and in the end, innovation, is it going to reach the patient or not? We want that innovation reaches the patient as fast as possible, and there's a risk that these different types of regulatory requirements just slow down the process significantly.
Ari, what are we going to do about HTA on medical devices in Greece?
So we still have plenty of time to begin with, so we don't need you don't need to become stressful. But the idea is to come up with a high-level blueprint about the basic stages through the ongoing process that we're actually working on. So as part of the ongoing process, the TSI-funded project, we have a full-blown case study that will be applying in practice the new methods and processes, the new manual we presented last week in the stakeholder workshop. But at the same time, the idea is to have a quick, dirty, if you allow me to say, a case study, practical, top-level application in terms of a new medical device, or at least some kind of a blueprint in terms of the basic methods and processes. And I should say that we are not alone here, because most member states don't have such explicit procedures or plans ahead in terms of how they will be adapting and applying the new regulation. But I just want to add an additional comment about Felix's previous point, which is, I think we need a better coordination at EU level in terms of all the different regulations and acts. Minister mentioned about the wastewater treatment directive, that he very nicely and actively intervened and mentioned that this is probably a very problematic case. And it was simply because it was shaped up by different decision makers. It was the Ministers of Energy, right? But the bill goes down to the Ministers of Health. And you can see the conflict between the two different perspectives, even for the same regulation. Professor Moll has mentioned about the need to have a better coordination between the different international organizations involved in procedures relating to, for example, UN responsibilities. We need something similar for the dozens of new acts and regulations that are being prepared as we speak, because there are a range of different perspectives that have to be balanced in a more efficient way, if you allow me to say. So that would be another point to consider.
Yeah. Coming back a bit on the HTA things in Greece and following up a bit on the HTA process on devices, is it too soon to discuss HTA on digital applications as well?
Yes, it's too soon.
Probably. Indeed, I think it's a novel field, and I think many things cannot be resolved at the EU level still, but some countries do make important progress, Germany, France, Belgium among them, and I think that we should at least discuss a bit, if not start building some things around it, because the wave of innovation in this sector might be too quick. Now, Vaso, regarding the application of HTA in Greece, how do you see the position of the patients, the place of the patients, and the role of the patients in this process? Earlier last week, the documents were presented. You were there. We met. How do you see the progress in this, and how do you see your place in this?
Okay. First of all, we have to see how patients can effectively participate in HTA discussions and processes, because there are some things that we need to see further. We need to discuss it with patient associations so that we will have patients in the center of decision-making also in HTA. We are at a good, let's say, road, but we need to focus on some specific topics in order not to put some barriers in patient involvement in HTA. We will see it together with the Ministry of Health and all the regulators, of course, and I think that we will find the best possible solution for effective participation of patients.
Can I just add something? Because I think that's important to highlight. For example, taking consideration of this particular project, We have 3 or 4 patient associations that are part of a continuous stakeholder group as the project evolves. At the same time, we have set up a working group for translating the outputs and recommendation of the project into legal adjustment and amendments of the existing law. And again, patient representatives are observers of this working group together with industry representatives. And so again, we have tried to involve and engage all main stakeholders, including patients, representatives and associations, together with industry associations, as transparent and as collectively we can. So, for example, in the new methods, guidances and manuals that were presented last week, we have asked from all associations explicitly for the feedback, for the comments in written form by next week. So it's nice to discuss about these things and opportunities to engage and how they can contribute, but there is a point in time where everyone has to contribute somehow. And so this is the opportunity for many stakeholders, because consultation will run until the end of the week. So please, if you want to contribute, now's the time. Don't come next week and don't come next month. We don't want to come up with any additional delay. So please go on, review the documents, submit your written forms so we can take them into consideration.
Yeah.
I think there's some other. I mean, that's great that you're doing that consultation, and I know you're working hard to reform the system in Greece. More broadly, in terms of HTA, do you want to say HTA technology or HTA processes? We need to think about how medicines and medical devices actually impact the broader healthcare system. The minister talked this morning about the pressures of the healthcare workforce, the need to reduce wait times. But HTA systems sometimes can pressure us into making comparisons with very old medicines at very low prices, which inhibit the ability to use the more modern medicines, which can reduce the appointment burden for dermatologists, which can reduce the need for patients to enter a care home, which can reduce the need for surgeries. We need to think about how we evaluate these medicines, not by just what is the lowest cost comparator that we can compare them to, but how they actually can relieve some of the burdens in the healthcare system that we see: wait times, staff shortages, staff pressure, hospital capacity.
However, some of those aspects would be typically included in cost effectiveness for say, exercise, or perhaps qualitatively assessed in the assessment and appraisal process. So do we need a better model or a more generalized model, you mean?
I think we need to take those elements into consideration. I think there are many countries, and even the European Commission, that's concerned about mental health and the ability to treat mental health appropriately. It's almost impossible to bring a new mental health pharmaceutical to Europe because the cost comparators are so low.
Do you think there will be, so we're talking about the HTA quite a lot, but do you think there will be pressure against systems to revise their stance against HTA decisions? And by that I mean pressure to, let's say, provide some leeway for prices due to... Oh, there's Nathalie. Due to the pressures from the US.
Possibly. I mean, I think the pressure from the US is going to force a change. I don't know what that change is. I don't know how it's going to go. But I mean, it's higher budgets for pharmaceuticals. 2, it's a more fair evaluation system for the value of new medicines. Those are two ways. I don't know how that's going to work out, but those are the 2 real necessary moves that need to happen.
Thank you very much. And since Nathalie is with us, hello Nathalie, can you hear us? Thank you very much. We have been discussing for the good part of an hour currently on how we can improve access to healthcare innovation given the discussions in the changes of the regulatory setting in Europe. Given those rapid evolutions of the healthcare landscape, and the significant international developments that take place currently, what major changes do you foresee at the European level in terms of the regulatory framework for medicines? And how can EFPIA contribute to safeguarding access to innovation as well as competitiveness?
Thank you very much for the question and also for inviting me this morning. I'm sorry I can't be there. I think to answer your question, at a moment where the competitiveness is extremely high for our sector globally, and we compete with individual countries with very simple legislative frameworks and systems, Europe's legislative offer has to be bolder, simpler, and faster. It's really quite straightforward. We need to prove that we want the innovation by having a legislative environment that attracts it, accelerates it, and gives faster access. So this means, and I heard Phil just say, now this means that all our legislation has to make sure that the investments that we've lost over the last 20 years at an alarming rate come back to Europe because we offer a very bold, very simple, and a very fast regulatory system that supports the transformation of innovation into products. What can EFPIA do to do that? Obviously come with the proposals that are at the same level, if not more competitive, than existing legislative frameworks in other parts of the world, like the US, like China. These parts of the world have had pro-biotech, pro-life science strategies for the last 20 years. And Europe has been less consistent, less focused on life sciences in this sense. And at the moment, the technology has exponentially grown since the genome sequence over the last 25 years. And we have no time left to be the most attractive. So I think we have the right ingredients. There are lots of legislation in draft form at the moment, being finalized, whether it's the general pharmaceutical legislation, the Biotech Act, the Innovation Act, the Life Science Strategy, the Critical Medicines Act. So we have lots of open files where now Europe has to prove that it has what it takes to be the place for innovation, but not only innovation, also for development, production, for access.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you all for this great discussion. Ελπίζω ότι απολαύσατε αυτή την συζήτηση. Μας δόθηκε λίγο παραπάνω ώρα, οπότε μπορέσαμε να εμβαθύνουμε σε λίγο περισσότερα στοιχεία αυτής. Και σας ευχαριστούμε όλους πάρα πολύ για την παρουσία σας. Thank you very much, Nathalie. Thank you very much to all the speakers. And Ilya, back to you. Yeah.